Try not to drop the rifle, Palace boy. Ree smirked, just loud enough for the crowd to hear. But the royal guard didn't blink. He took one shot, and suddenly, no one was laughing anymore. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that like button and tell us in the comments. Have you ever watched someone earn respect without saying a word? Now, let's get into it. The wind moved gently over the open countryside, carrying the faint smell of cordite and cut grass across the public shooting range, sprawled beneath the pale English sky. Folding tables, spotting scopes, and brass casings littered the firing lines like artifacts of controlled chaos. Dust motes danced in the slanting afternoon light as shooters called out distances and wind conditions to each other. It was the club's open demonstration weekend, a chance for civilians, veterans, and hobbyists to gather, compare gear, and swap stories over noise and recoil. Guardian Edward Hale stood near the boundary fence, his black windbreaker concealing a physique sculpted by years of military discipline. Unlike the other attendees, wearing tactical vests and patches advertising their affiliations, Hale carried himself with the unmistakable stillness of a man who'd learned to stand motionless for hours. His eyes, trained to maintain the famous 1,000-yard stare while tourists posed beside him at Buckingham Palace, now quietly assessed each shooter's form with professional detachment. A forgotten cup of tea sat cooling on the fence post beside him. Steam long since vanished. Darren Reed dominated the center firing lane. His custom rifle glinted with expensive modifications, carbon fiber barrel, match-grade trigger, and a scope that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. With each booming shot, he turned to his admirers with theatrical satisfaction, his voice carrying deliberately across the range. The brass shell casings from his rifle ejected with a distinctive ping, scattering like gold coins at his feet. "That's how you do it, gentlemen," he announced after hitting the edge of a distant target. "Private contractor techniques can't teach this kind of precision." His small entourage nodded appreciatively, mostly younger shooters drawn to his confident swagger and impressive gear. One passed him a bottle of water, which Ree accepted without looking, his attention already scanning for his next audience. He took a swig, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and adjusted his tactical sunglasses with practiced nonchalance. His gaze swept the crowd, lingering dismissively on Hale, who'd remained silent at the periphery for nearly 2 hours. "You one of the range staff?" Ree called out, squinting at the solitary figure. When Hale simply shook his head, Ree's attention moved on, uninterested in anyone who didn't immediately contribute to his audience. What Ree and the others couldn't know was that Guardian Edward Hale had completed 3 combat deployments with the Coldstream Guards before his posting to ceremonial duties. He'd qualified as an expert marksman in conditions that would make this pristine range feel like a carnival game. The same discipline that allowed him to stand motionless during the changing of the guard had been forged in firefights where stillness meant survival. His calloused trigger finger had felt the weight of life-or-death decisions in places most civilians couldn't find on a map. But Hale hadn't come to prove anything. He'd come to observe, to maintain his familiarity with civilian ranges before next week's unit qualifications. The Queen's Guard might be famous for their ceremonial presence, but those who wore the scarlet tunic remained combat soldiers first, something most civilians never realized. As the afternoon progressed, a clipboard with the range roster made its way through the crowd. When it reached Hale, He signed his name and affiliation with precise handwriting that reflected the same attention to detail evident in everything he did. The pen moved across the paper with efficient, measured strokes. The man collecting signatures glanced down, did a double take, then smirked. "Royal Guard," he said, his voice edged with disbelief. "Didn't know you lads were allowed to shoot real guns." His comment caught Ree's attention, who looked up from cleaning his barrel. "You're kidding," he said, his eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "One of the Queen's mannequins out here with the real shooters." The ripple of chuckles that followed carried just enough mockery to draw looks from several bystanders. A mother explaining rifle safety to her teenage son glanced over with a slight frown, while an older gentleman loading magazines paused, assessing the situation developing across the range. His weathered hands hesitated over a half-filled magazine. "Thought they just stood around looking pretty," someone added from behind a spotting scope. "Maybe he's here to pose for the brochure," another chimed in. Hale offered no reply. His expression remained unreadable, set somewhere between mild boredom and razor-sharp attention. He moved through the line with the same calm precision he maintained on parade grounds, unhurried, but unmistakably deliberate. No clinking kit, no flashy upgrades, just a standard-issue duffel slung over one shoulder. The faded canvas contrasted sharply with the brand-new tactical bags surrounding him. An older man with silver hair and the unmistakable posture of military service watched from the observation benches, his eyes narrowing slightly as he registered both Hale's bearing and the growing mockery. He'd seen this before, the easy dismissal of ceremonial troops by those who'd never bothered to learn what that service truly entailed. His fingers tapped a rhythm on his knee that matched no music, but perhaps echoed some long-ago marching cadence. "You guarding the car park today, mate?" Ree called out, drawing more laughter. Hale gave a faint nod, then walked to the edge of the observation benches and sat down. From there, he watched every detail, every adjustment, every shooter's technique, taking it all in like a man counting heartbeats. A younger shooter with a brand-new rifle asked his companion, "Why is everyone giving him a hard time?" "Royal Guards," his friend explained with exaggerated patience. "They're the guys in the red coats and funny hats who stand outside the palace just for show, you know." The mockery lingered throughout the afternoon, low enough to avoid confrontation, loud enough to humiliate. It wasn't cruelty exactly, just the casual dismissal of someone mistaken for ornamental. No one there knew what the title Queen's Company actually meant. Not yet. But soon they'd learn that a man doesn't need to speak loudly when his silence is loaded. A shot cracked across the range, echoing through the valley. Ree's target jolted, barely nicked on the left edge. "Still counts," he called out, lowering his rifle and turning to the watching crowd with arms raised in triumph. "That's how you handle a moving target at distance, folks." Ree wasn't military, though he liked to imply otherwise. Private contractor, part-time instructor, full-time loudmouth. His gear was pristine, his scope military grade, his Instagram stories full of slow-motion recoil and rented desert training grounds. Around the range, he strutted like the self-appointed sheriff of marksmanship. The titanium watch on his wrist caught the sun as he gestured, another prop in his carefully curated image. "In my line of work," he continued, holstering his pistol with a flourish, "you don't get second chances. You either make the shot or you don't." He spotted Hale sitting alone on the bench and couldn't resist another opportunity to assert his dominance. "You right over there, Buckingham?" he called out. "Need help holding the gun upright with those ceremonial arms?" The crowd laughed. A few people looked away, uncomfortable with the targeted mockery, but no one spoke up. Hale didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the distant targets, as if memorizing their positions. "Come on," Ree pressed, emboldened by Hale's silence. "You ever even fired that rifle they give you, or do they just hand you the pretty gun to match your silly hat?" Another chuckle rippled through the onlookers. A father explained in a hushed voice to his confused son, "He's talking about the Royal Guards. They carry rifles, but they're mostly for show." Still, Hale said nothing. He adjusted his position slightly on the bench, not from discomfort, but with the economical movement of someone accustomed to maintaining posture for hours at a time. Ree's voice grew louder, sensing an easy target. "You know what? Let's settle it right here. One shot each. Moving target, $200 MO. We'll see if the Queen's mannequin can hold a candle to a real shooter." Several people perked up at the challenge. Even the range officer looked over, sensing the atmosphere shift. Hale finally looked up. His expression didn't change. Calm, steady, unperturbed. "I'm just here to observe," he said plainly. Ree leaned back, his arms spread wide in mock surrender. "Yeah, I figured. They don't let window dressings touch real steel." The laughter grew louder. "He's going to snap," a younger shooter whispered to his friend. "You watch. He'll try to prove something." But Hale didn't. He just returned his gaze to the targets as if Ree didn't exist. Only one man there understood the restraint it took to stay quiet in the face of such provocation. The silver-haired observer, whose own military service had taught him to recognize true discipline when he saw it. Darren Ree, however, was just getting started. He turned back to his table, theatrically cleaning his rifle barrel as if wiping down a trophy. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he announced, "Tell you what, I'll even let you go second. That way you can watch how it's done, Palace Boy." No response from Hale. "You're good at that, at least," Ree continued, enjoying his captive audience. "Standing still, not blinking. Bet you got a medal for it." The crowd's laughter had grown uneasy. The atmosphere had shifted from playful banter to something that felt uncomfortably like bullying. Ree kept pushing. "Come on, soldier boy. Don't make me call the palace for a permission slip." At last, Hale stood, not fast, not tense, just rose from the bench with the same composed posture he'd maintained all day. He walked to the edge of the firing zone and looked down range, taking a moment to assess the wind flags and target distances. "I said, I'm just here to observe," he repeated, his voice quiet but clear. Ree rolled his eyes dramatically. "And I'm here to put on a show. Someone's got to teach these people what real shooting looks like." He stepped up to the line, nodded to the range officer. "Moving target 200 mem. I get one shot. He gets one shot. Let's find out who's playing dress up." The range officer hesitated. "This isn't a competition range, mate. Relax," Ree said dismissively. "It's just a little fun." From the back, someone muttered, "Not the kind of fun you want to lose." Ree glanced at Hale, challenging. "Still in Buckingham? Or are you going to stare at me until I change my mind?" Hale didn't move, just held Ree's gaze for a moment. Calm, focused, as if measuring him, not answering him. Then he turned back toward the bench. The silver-haired man, the retired Royal Marine, finally broke the tense silence. He stepped forward, slow but deliberate, his hands in his jacket pockets. His posture remained rigid from years of military structure he hadn't fully left behind. You one of the grenadiers, son? He asked, directing the question to Hale. Hale turned his head slightly, gave a respectful nod. Queen's Company Coldstream. The Marine's eyebrows lifted in recognition. Thought so. You lot don't say much. The exchange, though brief, carried weight. The Marine's question hadn't been casual. He'd specifically asked about regiment details, displaying knowledge that meant nothing to most observers, but clearly registered with Hale. Hale didn't reply further, maintaining the economy of communication that characterized everything he did. The Marine turned to Ree now. You ever served? Ree grinned confidently. Private contractor. Did security work in Iraq? Different game. The Marine tilted his head slightly. Yeah, I imagine it is. That was all he said, but something in his tone, calm, unimpressed, shifted the mood. The crowd went quiet again, this time with curiosity rather than discomfort. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, they'd misjudged the man in the windbreaker. Ree sensed the change and grew defensive. All right, then. Let the man shoot, if he can. The range officer looked to Hale, uncertain. You up for this, guardsman? The use of the proper term, guardsman, rather than soldier, suggested the range officer might have a military background himself. Hale looked at the weapon rack. Do you have an L-85A2? Standard issue, the officer said, already reaching for it. No attachments? Hale added. Iron sights only. Now people were really watching. The request for an unmodified service rifle with iron sights, eschewing the scopes and modifications that civilian shooters favored, spoke volumes to those who understood military marksmanship. That's what they qualify with in training, someone whispered. The Marine folded his arms. It's what they qualify with in war. Ree scoffed. This isn't war. This is a Saturday at the range. But no one laughed with him this time. Hale stepped up beside the line, not for applause, not to win anything, just to honor a tradition that didn't need permission or explanation. And in that moment, without show or words, the respect in the air shifted quietly in his direction. The L-85A2 lay flat on the wooden bench, clean, standard, nothing flashy. No custom trigger, no carbon fiber barrel, just military stock and steel. A tool, not a toy. Hale picked it up like someone greeting an old friend. He didn't test the weight, didn't need to. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the chamber, adjusting the sling, folding the bipod. Each motion precise, automatic, the result of thousands of repetitions. The range officer watched him, his eyebrows rising slightly. He'd seen professionals shoot before. He'd seen amateurs pose, but this was something else, something practiced into muscle memory. A father whispered to his teenage son, "Watch his hands! That's proper firearms discipline!" Ree, meanwhile, continued preparing his custom rifle, still muttering to the man beside him. Probably just luck if he hits paper. These guys are ceremonial. They don't train like we do. The Marine turned his head slightly. You sure about that? Ree hesitated, then forced a chuckle. We'll see. Targets were reset. This time, a silhouette, partially obscured, mounted on a moving rig at 200 meter. The rig would shift laterally. No warning, no pattern. Hale stepped up to the line, dropped to a prone position with fluid efficiency, settled the rifle against his shoulder as if it belonged there. His breathing visibly slowed, each inhalation measured, each exhalation controlled. He's not even adjusting elevation, someone whispered. He doesn't need to, the Marine replied. He already calculated it walking up. This was true. Hale had been observing the range conditions all afternoon, mentally noting wind patterns, studying how other shooters' rounds were affected by the subtle cross breeze. What looked like casual observation had actually been constant assessment. The crowd leaned forward. Even those who'd been chatting or scrolling on phones earlier were now focused entirely on the line. The breeze picked up, gentle but irregular. Flags on the markers wavered, the rig whirred to life. Ree had taken the first shot last round. Now, it was Hale's turn. "Shooter ready," the range officer called. Hale didn't answer, but he exhaled. And in that breath, something shifted again. Not in the wind, not in the target, but in the people watching. Like they were holding their own breath, waiting to see something they didn't quite understand, but couldn't look away from. The target zipped sideways, sudden, sharp, and faster than most anticipated. Ree had needed 2 seconds to track it earlier, and even then, he'd only clipped it on the edge. Hale didn't adjust, didn't flinch. He exhaled once more, long, controlled, then pulled the trigger. The sound cracked across the range, not louder than any other shot that day, but different, cleaner, more final. The target jolted violently and then stopped, dead center. Not a nick, not a graze, bullseye. The silence afterward was more profound than the shot itself. The crowd didn't cheer. They just stared. Even the wind seemed to pause. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." Ree squinted through his scope, blinked, then looked up at the range officer. "Hit marker?" he asked, almost hopeful. The officer walked to the screen at the observation post. When he spoke, his voice was flat with disbelief. "Center mass. 2 cm off perfect dead center. That's military qualification gold standard." The Marine let out a single, quiet whistle. "No attachments," he muttered. "No warm-up. And he's still got parade polish on his boots." Ree looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "Lucky shot," he muttered. The Marine turned. "No, mate, that's not luck. That's training. That's thousands of rounds logged in the rain, on no sleep, under pressure. That's Royal Guard discipline." Hale stood slowly, brushing gravel from his sleeve. He didn't celebrate, didn't smile, just flipped the rifle to safety, handed it back to the officer, and stepped aside. His reaction, or lack thereof, told its own story. This wasn't a special accomplishment for him. This was standard performance, just another qualification round in a career built on meeting exacting standards. The applause came late, and it wasn't loud. It wasn't stadium-style cheering. It was something better. It was respect. A man near the back, who hadn't said a word all day, gave Hale a nod. Another offered a quiet, "Well done, lad." Even the officer behind the counter, who'd barely looked up earlier, raised a thumb from his clipboard. Ree stared for a moment, then looked away, because there wasn't anything left to say. Hale didn't gloat, didn't linger. He just did what he'd been trained to do: make the shot, make it clean, then move on. The target was still swaying gently as Hale stepped back from the firing line, brushing dust from his trouser knee. A few people approached him now, cautiously, like spectators approaching a monument they'd misjudged. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" one of the younger men asked, softening the cockiness in his tone. Hale simply replied, "Training." The single-word answer wasn't evasive. It was accurate. What they'd witnessed wasn't exceptional talent or natural ability, but the product of rigorous, methodical training. Ree hovered a few feet away, visibly uncomfortable. His eyes darted between Hale and the screen, still displaying the bullseye hit. Someone tried to hand him his own rifle back, but he didn't seem to notice. His earlier audience had dispersed, their attention drawn to the unexpected demonstration of quiet expertise. The range officer cleared his throat. "That was a regulation military shot, Sergeant. Textbook execution." Hale gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, sir." From the crowd, the Marine raised his voice just enough to carry. "That's what happens when you spend years doing drills people think are just for show." There were no more jokes about costumes, no more jabs about mannequins. Even those who hadn't said a word earlier now shifted their body language, open stances, respectful expressions. Someone clapped, then another, not loud, not theatrical, just genuine. Hale nodded once to no one in particular, then walked back to the bench where his duffel still sat. Retried to save face. "Bet he can't do it again." The Marine didn't even look at him. "He doesn't need to." Rachel, the club's administrator, stepped forward quietly. "Do you mind if we log that shot for our club record?" Hale paused only a moment before replying, "If it helps remind people what we really do, go ahead." Then he zipped up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. He hadn't raised his voice once, but somehow he'd silenced an entire crowd. It was the Marine who caught up to him first, just before Hale reached the gravel path leading toward the car park. "Sergeant," he said, "mind if I ask you something?" Hale stopped. "Of course, sir." "You said Queen's Company, Coldstream." Hale nodded. "Yes, sir?" "That's real service active, not just ceremony." "Yes, sir. 2 deployments before I was posted to London, then public duties. Buckingham, Windsor, St. James's, and Horse Guards." The Marine gave a low whistle. "And the shooting, that's just part of it. We train live fire every quarter. Rifle qualifications every 6 months, urban simulation drills, threat scenarios. We're ceremonial second, infantry first." The Marine smiled. "I wish more people knew that." "I don't mind that they don't," Hale said quietly. "It's not my job to correct them. It's my job to be ready if they're ever wrong at the wrong moment." This philosophy, this acceptance that public misperception was irrelevant to duty, embodied the quiet professionalism that characterized the Guards' regiments. Ree had lingered behind them, listening to the exchange. Now, red-faced but making an effort at dignity, he finally stepped forward. "I didn't mean to disrespect," he said, his voice clipped but genuine. "Didn't realize you guys actually did all that." Hale didn't gloat. He simply extended a hand. "We all serve in different ways." The gesture, professional, devoid of ego, offered Ree a graceful conclusion to what could have ended far more awkwardly. Ree hesitated, then took the offered hand. Another man nearby spoke up. "Why didn't you say anything earlier when he started talking down to you?" It was the question many had been wondering. Why someone with such evident skill would tolerate the mockery without correction. Hale glanced around at the crowd, still listening. "Because if I needed their respect," he said, gesturing to the rifle range, "I'd have lost it already." The statement hung in the air, profound in its simplicity. It wasn't that he didn't value respect. It was that he understood true respect wasn't demanded or defended. It was earned through actions, not words. A few heads nodded slowly, processing this perspective. "I don't come here to prove anything," Hale added, "but I won't stand still when someone questions the integrity of what we represent. Not for myself, for the uniform." His distinction, not for himself, but for the uniform, captured the essence of military service. Individual ego was secondary to the standards and traditions represented by the uniform itself. The Marine gave a final nod. Well said, son. The moment hung there, quiet, dignified, complete. Then Hale adjusted the strap on his shoulder and turned toward the lot. The sound of brass casings clinking into bins behind him carried on, but now it did so with a different rhythm, one that sounded a little more like respect. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as Edward Hale made his way toward the car park, the weight of his duffel shifting gently against his shoulder. No one followed this time, not out of avoidance, but out of quiet reverence. A few of them watched him go, still processing the contrast between the man they thought they saw and the one who actually stood before them. Conversation had resumed on the range, but with a different tone, more subdued, more thoughtful. At the gate, someone called after him. "You coming back next weekend?" Hale paused at the door of his car, then turned slightly over his shoulder. "Only if the Queen doesn't need me." That answer earned a few appreciative chuckles, this time not mocking, but understanding. It captured perfectly the dual nature of his service, the ordinary weekend shooter, who was also something far more significant. He placed the duffel in the trunk, methodical as ever, removed his jacket, closed the lid, sat behind the wheel, like a man who had already moved on from the moment, not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need to be stretched. He'd made his point with one shot, one bullet, one answer to an entire afternoon of doubt. Inside the clubhouse, the range officer was already marking the shot on the records board. No name attached, just a small annotation. 200 Menor Center, no optics. The Marine looked over at it and nodded once. "Let it stand," he said. "People will ask." "Think you'll come back?" one of the younger shooters asked. The Marine shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But I'll tell you this. If I ever see that red coat again, I'll remember there's a soldier underneath it." The comment summed up the lesson of the day, that appearances, whether ceremonial uniforms or quiet demeanors, often concealed capabilities that the casual observer never suspected. And outside, driving calmly down a winding road lined with hedges and soft sunlight, the man in question didn't look back once, because for Guardian Edward Hale, silence was enough. So was the shot. Would you have underestimated him too if all you saw was the uniform? And how many times do we mistake silence for weakness? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story made you rethink what Royal Guards really stand for, give it a like. It helps more than you know. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss tomorrow's new story. And if you know someone who thinks ceremonial means soft, send this video their way. Let them see what quiet discipline really looks like. You should see some of our other Royal Guard stories popping up on your screen now. Check those out next. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another story that proves honor isn't just tradition, it's earned.